My name is Martin Hale. I'm 45 years old and work as a mechanic at a small but well-loved auto repair shop in our little Midwestern town. I've been fixing engines, swapping out tires, and getting grease under my nails since I was 18. It's honest work, and while it hasn't made me rich, it's kept food on the table and a roof over my head for decades. 3 years ago, I married Carol. She was 22 at the time, bright-eyed and full of life, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel like the luckiest man alive. We met when she brought her beat-up old car into the shop, and from the moment she smiled at me, I was done for. Some people raised their eyebrows at the age gap, but it didn't bother us. I've always been a simple man, loyal to a fault, and grateful for what I have. Carol, on the other hand, was a spark of energy in my otherwise predictable life. She'd talk about the future with stars in her eyes, dreaming big about traveling the world, trying new things, and living life to the fullest. I tried to keep up with her energy, but over time I started to notice the cracks. Lately, she's been more distant, her phone glued to her hand and her laughter less frequent. I told myself it was just a phase, that maybe she was feeling restless or bored. But nothing could have prepared me for what she said last Friday night. The garage was quiet, except for the rhythmic sound of the ceiling fan creaking overhead. It was late, and I had just finished changing the oil on Mr. Abernathy's old pickup truck. I'd been meaning to head home, but Carol had texted me, asking if I could meet her at the diner near the highway. She said she wanted to talk. When I walked in, I saw her sitting in the far corner booth, scrolling through her phone. She barely noticed me until I slid into the seat across from her. "Hey," I said, wiping my hands on the rag I'd tucked into my back pocket. "What's so urgent that we couldn't talk at home?" She smiled, but it wasn't her usual warm smile. It was the kind of smile that felt rehearsed, almost too perfect. "I didn't want to talk about this at home. It's personal." I leaned back in the booth, trying to read her. "All right, what's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment, tucking a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear. "Martin, I've been thinking a lot about my life, our life, and there's something I need to say." "Okay," I said slowly, waiting for the punchline. She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her on the table. "My youth is fleeting, so I want an open marriage." I stared at her, blinking a few times to make sure I'd heard her right. Then I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "That's funny. I didn't know you had a sense of humor now, Carol." "I'm serious," she said, her voice steady and her eyes locked on mine. That's when it hit me. She wasn't joking. "Oh, you're serious," I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. "So let me get this straight. You want an open marriage because you think your youth is fleeting? What does that even mean?" "It means," she said carefully, like she'd practiced this speech in front of a mirror, "that I'm 25, Martin. I'm in my prime. I don't want to wake up one day, years from now, and regret not exploring my options." "Exploring your options," I repeated, nodding slowly. "Right. And I suppose I'm just supposed to sit at home while you go exploring." "No," she said quickly. "It wouldn't be like that. You could explore too." I couldn't help but laugh again, this time louder. "Oh, that's rich. You think I have time to explore when I'm pulling 12-hour shifts to keep us afloat? Real generous of you, Carol." She frowned, her perfect facade starting to crack. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Martin. I need this." I leaned back, crossing my arms over my chest. "You need this? Well, all right, if you insist. My first date's tomorrow." Her mouth fell open, and for a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. "What? You're kidding, right?" "Why would I be kidding?" I said, shrugging. "If this is what you want, then fine. But it works both ways, Carol. I'll follow your rules and lead." Her face flushed and her voice rose an octave. "Are you cheating on me?" I laughed again, shaking my head. "No, Carol. I'm just following your rules and lead. You're the one who opened this door, remember?" She stared at me, her jaw tight and her hands trembling slightly. For the first time since this conversation started, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "This isn't about you, Martin," she said quietly, almost pleading now. "It's about me. I don't want to feel like I'm missing out." "And what about me?" I said, my voice harder now. "Do I not get a say in this? Or does my loyalty mean nothing to you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at the table, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her coffee cup. I drove home from the diner with a weight in my chest that I couldn't shake. The yellowed streetlights lit the empty road ahead, but my mind was on the mess Carol had just dumped in my lap. My youth is fleeting. Those words played on a loop in my head, like a broken record. What was I supposed to say to that? I knew there was an age gap between us. Hell, I knew it the day I put a ring on her finger. But I didn't think it would turn into an expiration date on her commitment. When I got home, I opened the fridge and grabbed a beer. Carol was still at the diner, probably staring at her phone and patting herself on the back for how mature and progressive her little speech had been. I slumped into my recliner, the springs groaning under my weight. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I looked around at the place we'd built together, a modest home with mismatched furniture and a kitchen table I'd sanded down myself last summer when it started splintering. This was supposed to be our life, a partnership. But now, Carol wanted to treat it like a buffet, picking and choosing what parts of it she liked and leaving the rest for me to clean up. The bitter taste in my mouth wasn't from the beer. It was from her words. The next morning, Carol came home just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. She looked surprised to see me up so early, but I didn't say anything. I just leaned back in my chair and watched her shuffle around the kitchen like she didn't have a care in the world. Finally, she broke the silence. So, about last night. I raised an eyebrow. What about it? I just want to make sure we're on the same page, she said, leaning against the counter. I wasn't trying to hurt you, Martin. I just think this could be good for both of us. Good for both of us, I repeated, setting my mug down a little harder than I meant to. And by both of us, you mean you. Because let's be honest, Carol, this isn't about us. This is about you wanting to have your cake and eat it too. Her jaw tightened, but she kept her voice calm. That's not fair. I just think it's healthy to have options. We're at different stages in life, Martin. You've lived your 20s. I haven't. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, I've lived my 20s all right, working double shifts to pay off my dad's hospital bills and making sure I didn't end up homeless. Real wild times. She flinched, but I didn't care. She wanted honesty? Fine. So, what's your plan? I asked, folding my arms across my chest. Are you just going to start swiping right on every guy with a six-pack and a trust fund? Or is there already someone lined up? Go ahead, Carol. Enlighten me. Her cheeks flushed. There's no one else, Martin. This isn't about anyone in particular. Sure it isn't, I said, shaking my head. And you really expect me to sit here and play house while you explore your options? You think I'm just going to wait around like some lovesick puppy? She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. You said you'd follow my rules and lead. If you want to go on dates, go ahead. No one's stopping you. I stared at her, my stomach twisting. She really believed this nonsense, didn't she? She thought this was some kind of game, some modern marriage fantasy where there were no consequences. All right, I said finally, pushing back my chair and standing up. You want me to explore my options? Fine. Don't say I didn't warn you. By lunchtime, I'd made up my mind. If Carol wanted me to act like this marriage was some kind of open-door policy, I was going to do it. Not to spite her, well, not just to spite her, but because I needed to remind myself what I was worth. I wasn't going to sit around and let her treat me like a placeholder. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. It had been years since I'd thought about dating, but there were still a few names that stood out. Women I'd known before Carol came into my life. Women who might still be interested, or at least willing to grab a coffee. One name in particular caught my eye. Lisa Garrett. We'd gone on a few dates years ago before Carol, but it fizzled out when I got busy with work. Lisa was kind, smart, and, if I remembered correctly, had a laugh that could light up a room. I tapped her number and hit call before I could second-guess myself. Martin Hale, she answered after the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. Well, this is a surprise. Hey, Lisa, I said, trying to sound casual. How've you been? We talked for a few minutes, catching up on the usual things. Work, family, life. Finally, I took a deep breath and asked, listen, I know this is kind of out of the blue, but would you want to grab lunch sometime? Catch up properly? There was a pause, and for a moment I thought she was going to turn me down. Then she said, you know what? I'd like that. How about this Saturday? Saturday works for me, I said, feeling a small flicker of relief. Great, I'll text you the details, she said before we hung up. That evening, I came home to find Carol lounging on the couch, her legs curled up under her as she scrolled through her phone. Where have you been? She asked without looking up. Just out, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Out where? I shrugged. Does it matter? She put her phone down and frowned at me. You're acting weird, Martin. Am I? I said, raising an eyebrow. Or are you just not used to me taking your advice? What's that supposed to mean? It means I've got plans Saturday, I said, walking past her toward the kitchen. Don't wait up. She sat up straighter, her eyes narrowing. Plans? What kind of plans? Nothing you need to worry about, I said, grabbing a beer from the fridge, her face flushed with anger. Martin, if you're trying to make a point, this isn't funny. I'm not trying to make a point, I said, leaning against the counter. I'm just following your rules and lead, Carol. Isn't that what you wanted? She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. For the first time since this whole mess started, she looked genuinely unsure of herself. Saturday rolled around faster than I expected. By the time I pulled up to the small Italian restaurant Lisa had picked, my palms were sweating. It had been years since I'd gone on a proper date, and I couldn't help but feel a little out of practice. Lisa was already waiting when I walked in, seated at a corner table by the window. She looked almost exactly as I remembered. Wavy auburn hair that framed her face, warm hazel eyes, and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Martin, she said, standing to hug me. It's been forever. It has, I said, returning the hug. You look great, Lisa. Well, so do you, she said with a laugh, her eyes sparkling. We settled into the booth, and for the first few minutes, the conversation was polite and surface level. But as the wine flowed and the food arrived, something shifted. You know, she said, twirling her fork in her pasta, I always wondered what happened to you. One day we were going out for drinks and the next, radio silence. I smiled awkwardly, scratching the back of my neck. Yeah, sorry about that. Life got complicated. Complicated how? She asked, leaning forward. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. I got married. Her eyebrows shot up. Married? Wow, I didn't see that coming. Neither did I admitted with a chuckle. But, you know, things happen. And how's that working out for you? She asked, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. I looked at her, debating how much to say. Then with a sigh, I said, honestly, it's a bit of a mess right now. Lisa tilted her head, curiosity written all over her face. Messy how? I hesitated again, but figured I'd already opened the door. She asked for an open marriage. Lisa blinked, then let out a surprised laugh. An open marriage? Wow, that's bold. You're telling me, I said, shaking my head. It came out of nowhere. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Lisa leaned back, studying me. And what about you? How do you feel about it? Honestly, I said, meeting her gaze, I'm pissed and hurt. But more than anything, I'm just tired. Tired of feeling like I'm not enough. For a moment, there was silence between us. Then Lisa reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. For what it's worth, Martin, you deserve better than that. Her touch was warm, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger and bitterness. I felt seen. As the evening went on, the tension I'd been carrying started to melt away. Lisa had a way of making me laugh, of making me forget the mess waiting for me back home. By the time we left the restaurant, the awkwardness was gone, replaced by an easy camaraderie that felt good. When we stepped outside, the night air was cool and crisp, the streetlights casting a soft glow on the sidewalk. Thanks for tonight, I said, shoving my hands in my pockets. Thank you, she said, smiling up at me. I had a great time. For a moment, we just stood there, the air between us charged with something unspoken. Lisa, I started, but before I could finish, she leaned up and kissed me. It wasn't a hesitant kiss. It was confident and sure, and it left me breathless. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, but she didn't look away. Good night, Martin, she said softly, before turning and walking to her car. I stood there for a long moment, watching her go. My mind was spinning, but one thing was clear. I didn't regret a single second of it. When I got home, it was late, and the house was dark. I thought Carol was asleep until I turned on the living room light and saw her sitting on the couch, her arms crossed, and her face set in a hard line. Had a nice night, did you? She said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I sighed, tossing my keys onto the coffee table. Not this again, Carol. What do you want? What do I want? She snapped, standing up and glaring at me. I want to know where the hell you've been all night. I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. You've got some nerve. You know that? You're the one who wanted this open marriage nonsense, and now you're mad because I went out. You didn't actually go on a date, she said, her voice rising. Did you? Why does it matter? I shot back. You said I could explore my options, remember? I'm just following your rules and lead. Don't you dare throw that back in my face, Martin, she yelled, her cheeks flushing with anger. "You're supposed to be my husband, and you're supposed to be my wife," I said, my voice cold. "But I guess that doesn't mean much to you anymore, does it?" Her jaw tightened. And for a moment, I thought she was going to slap me. Instead, she just stood there, breathing hard and glaring at me like I was the enemy. "Is this what you want?" I asked, my voice softer now. "To tear us apart piece by piece? Because that's where this is headed, Carol. And if that's the case, just say the word. I'm done playing games." For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." "Well, maybe you should have thought a little harder," I said, brushing past her and heading for the bedroom. The morning after Carol's outburst, I woke up feeling oddly calm. The weight I'd been carrying for weeks didn't feel so heavy anymore. Maybe it was Lisa's kiss still lingering on my mind, or maybe I was just tired of fighting battles I didn't start. Either way, I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let Carol drag me down any further. She wasn't in the kitchen when I walked in. Normally, I'd make us both coffee, but today I only made 1 cup. It felt like a small rebellion, and it tasted good. I grabbed my phone and sent a quick text to Lisa. "Martin, hey, I had a great time last night. Want to grab dinner this week?" Her reply came a few minutes later, and it was like a ray of sunshine breaking through a storm. "Lisa, I'd love to. Thursday work for you?" It was as simple as that. Carol, on the other hand, was anything but simple. By mid-afternoon, Carol finally emerged from the bedroom. She looked different. Her usual confident posture was gone, replaced by something hesitant, almost meek. "Morning," she said quietly, leaning against the doorframe. "Afternoon," I replied, not looking up from the newspaper I was pretending to read. She hesitated before walking over to the couch and sitting across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, like the calm before a storm. "I've been thinking," she said finally. "That's a dangerous pastime," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. She flinched but pressed on. "I've been thinking about us, Martin, about what I said, about the open marriage." I folded the newspaper and set it aside, finally meeting her gaze. "And I think I made a mistake," she said, her voice wavering. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know what I was thinking." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You didn't know what you were thinking? Or you didn't think I'd actually call your bluff?" Her cheeks flushed. "It wasn't a bluff. I thought it was what I wanted. But seeing you go out last night, it made me realize how much I hate the idea of losing you." "Losing me?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Carol, you lost me the second you decided I wasn't enough for you." "That's not true," she said quickly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I was stupid. I thought I needed something else, but I don't. I just need you." Her words should have meant something. A year ago, they would have been enough to pull me back in. But now they just felt hollow. "I don't know if I can believe you," I said quietly. "Not after everything you've put me through." "Please, Martin," she said, reaching for my hand. "Let me prove it to you. Let me make it right." I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't hold hers either. "You don't get to hit the reset button whenever you feel like it, Carol. That's not how this works." Thursday came faster than I expected. By the time I parked outside Lisa's house, I was nervous again. But this time, it was a good kind of nervous. Lisa greeted me at the door, looking effortlessly beautiful in a casual dress that swayed with every step. "You clean up well," she said with a smile, her eyes raking over me. "Coming from you, that's high praise," I replied, earning a laugh. We decided to keep it simple. A quiet dinner at a local steakhouse, followed by a walk along the riverfront. The conversation flowed as easily as it had on our first date, but this time there was something deeper. By the time we reached the end of the riverwalk, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "I'm glad you called," Lisa said, stopping to lean against the railing. "Me too," I said, standing beside her. "It's been a long time since I've felt this?" She asked, tilting her head. "Happy," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, and for a moment, everything else, the pain, the bitterness, the mess back home, faded away. When I got home that night, I found Carol waiting for me again. This time, she wasn't angry. She was crying. "You're seeing someone, aren't you?" she said, her voice breaking. I sighed, dropping my keys on the counter. "I'm seeing someone who doesn't make me feel like an afterthought, if that's what you're asking." Her sobs grew louder and she buried her face in her hands. "I can't lose you, Martin. Please don't do this." "You did this," I said, my voice hard. You don't get to burn our marriage to the ground and then cry about the ashes. I'll do anything, she said desperately, looking up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. Just tell me what I have to do. For a moment, I considered it. I thought about the life we'd built, the promises we'd made. But then I thought about Lisa, about the way she made me feel alive again. I don't think there's anything you can do, Carol, I said finally. Some things, they're just broken. 2 weeks later, I found myself at a crossroads. Carol had been doing everything she could to win me back. Cooking my favorite meals, leaving me little notes, even suggesting we go to couples counseling. And part of me wanted to believe she'd changed. But the other part of me knew better. Lisa, on the other hand, was a breath of fresh air. She didn't make me feel like I had to prove myself. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could just be. One evening, as I sat alone in the garage, the decision became clear. I walked into the house, where Carol was waiting in the kitchen. She looked up hopefully, but I shook my head. I can't do this anymore, I said simply. Do what? She asked, her voice trembling. Any of it, I said. I'm done trying to fix something that's already broken. And Lisa? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lisa's amazing, I admitted. But I need to figure out who I am without someone else telling me what I'm worth. I left that night with nothing but a duffel bag and my old truck. For the first time in years, I wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations.